Hart and James, the good boys of economics, come on up. These are the co-directors. Yeah, applause, applause, applause. Co-directors of the Center for Economics and Business Research at Western Washington University. We work with you closely. Here is a clicker. It is the most powerful clicker money can buy. Here's a microphone. I will see you soonish.
Threats, threats, threats. Okay.
Thank you, Joe. And Port Madison, thank you for having us. So we're going to jump in. The commander's asked us to stay on time, so we're going to be quick.
We said yes, sir.
The reference to Punxsutawney Phil will become clear, but it's...
I think this is the third time we've made that reference.
I also feel like we have to say something about all of the predictions of a recession.
It's coming.
Last year, right? We were here last year. Most everybody was saying we're going to have a recession at the end of 2023. And I feel cheated. There's been no recession. We'll talk about that. But mostly, we have this slide up to remind you, don't pay attention to the numbers so much as the hows and whys. It's the questions that we hope we get you to think about, asking why wasn't there a recession? What's different? What's happening right now? Not just will it be 4.5 or whatever the number happens to be. So we'll dive in. And for the whole time that we're talking, we want you to think about several themes. If not a recession, okay. When's consumer spending going to slow? It hasn't. It was supposed to slow last fall.
I blame them.
All right.
How come you're suspending?
Because they can do it on 4 easy installments. So, what happens to commercial real estate if interest rates stay higher? One of the things that we did say last year was if interest rates stay higher into the middle of 2024, we'll start to see some strain in the economy. The stock market started moving up really sharply beginning of November. Mostly NVIDIA, but still a few others as well. And the idea was we're going to get 6 interest rate cuts starting in early 2024. We're off to the races. Well, we're not going to get 6 cuts, and the stock market's still moving up. So keep an eye on some resets. Even if no one's going to call it a recession, we think some things are going to correct, not crash. Inflation, you're going to have to be paying attention to whether inflation comes down enough for the Federal Reserve to really lower interest rates. And then if you're going to make a forecast, you've got to decide what's going to happen with Ukraine, Middle East, debt in China. So lots of geopolitical issues to consider. So with that backdrop, we're going to focus very little on the macro economy, try to get down into the Kitsap bit. So National Association of Business Economists is NABE. So it doesn't really matter whether you grab Blue Chip or Bank of America's forecast. They're all pointing towards some slowing. So if we have, in the end, about 2.5% growth last year, and yes, we have to still predict, James, what?
Well, that's national too. So your local results may vary, right? So 2.5% nationally. We live in a world, and our world is averages and medians and all these other fancy terms. Your results are going to vary. So I'm going to try and be your voice here as we talk about some of the national
But do we
things.
know what the growth was in 2023?
No, funny thing, we're still getting 2023 data in. There can be up to a 6-month lag in some of this data. So we get the fun of people saying, well, what's going to happen in 2024? And we're like, what happened in 2023?
All right, so, but looking at 2024, unemployment moving up, and again, nationally, to a little over 4%, which is still historically very low. It's hard to talk about being in a recession with unemployment below 5%.
Tricky when you have wage growth and low unemployment and people want to talk about it's tough.
Inflation has come down sharply, come down a lot. The Federal Reserve wants it to get close to 2%. We're stuck around 3%. So
small hap in Baltimore won't help, by the way. That's going to be inflationary in nature.
All right, and lots of guesstimates on how fast inflation will come down, that last percent, and how hard the Federal Reserve would have to push, or would the Federal Reserve actually have to raise rates a little bit to get it come down, right? So there's a lot of disagreement, a lot of tension.
Can you imagine?
So we're going with 3 rate cuts starting in June or July. So
we've been saying that for a long time, though. By the way, that's not new for us. That's new for a lot of other people.
All right. So again, keep an eye on consumer spending. If it slows, it's not clear that the rest of the economy can carry the day. If unemployment doesn't move up and inflation doesn't come down, that puts a lot of pressure on the Federal Reserve. And then election year. We'll skip that.
Is that this year? Oh.
All right. One of the things that's all the talk about soft landing, no landing, and last year all the talk about recession. This slide shows the gray bars are recessions. So in 2000, there was talk of a soft landing, and then the recession hit. Financial crisis, lots of talk about soft landing, because as all the predictions come out for recession, and the recession doesn't hit right away, and people say, we've made it. We survived without the recession. You might get yours yet. Keep your fingers.
Are you forecasting recession at some time in the future?
I'm forecasting a correction, but I want to jump to KITSAP. And so it's hard to read the bottom legend.
Spaghetti was not on the menu today.
Spaghetti, no. So this is showing from the beginning of 2000, just in percentage terms, which industries really went down or how much they went down. So the purple line that dipped so much, not surprising, leisure and hospitality. And it's now back above its January 2020 levels in terms of number of people working. Right?
I think they'd be larger if they could find the people, right? I think if there were people that were there to do the work, they'd hire them. I love this chart, though. This was kind of fun because your blue line to me was the one that really stood out.
Professional and business services, a lot of growth, and it's a lot of small business. And so as we think locally, the role of the base, but also just the role of the place in terms of businesses starting. And Joe's going to nod and try to take a lot of credit, but we'll. Takeaway. Largely back, but look how many of your industry sectors aren't quite back to where they were.
Retail.
At the beginning of 2000. Part of that is different ways of doing business, right? And that's changing. There's a giant experiment going on called hybrid work, and we'll.
I noticed walking through the casino, I know none of you made this trip today. I noticed walking through that you don't have to stand at a table for someone to play roulette. They have machines that do it. I noticed the other day I went to Taco Time and I had to do my own order. I could give myself a tip, evidently, too. That was nice. But when you look at the slide and you see the decrease in employment in sectors, again, would they hire people if they could find them? Maybe. But it's also a story of automation in a lot of industries as well, which is not necessarily a bad thing because we have a smaller labor force per capita to deal with.
Okay, sticking with KITSAP. James, are you surprised if there's 36% of the employment in Kitsap County in government?
I was going to make a joke about trough here, but I decided this wouldn't play well. Actually, no, because in communities like yours, which is like most communities across the country, guess who's in your government sector? K-12. You have kids in your community. They require a lot of K-12 workers, which is where we've seen the increase in government workers. I've also noticed there were people back in that room over there. Those are all counted as government workers too.
Right, tribal's counted as government. So, I mean, if you go to Whatcom County, where we have Western Washington University, K-12 and the various school districts are some of the larger employers. So any modest to smaller size county or municipality is going to have a large government sector when you look at it in terms of percent of total employment.
These are not food safety inspectors.
Right. So I want you to think for just a second, because some of the dynamic in Kitsap. Information, just as a sector, not quite 1% of the jobs in Kitsap County.
When you say information sector, tell these good people what you mean.
Software engineering.
Oh.
So we're going to change the slide in just a moment and show some information from Seattle, no pun intended. And a lot of the jobs from Microsoft, some from Amazon, mostly Amazon. They're having to recount Amazon because it's originally retail. But I'll jump over. $131,000 is the average salary in that sector in Kitsap.
Average, remember, your results may vary.
All right. So you get 1%, not quite 1% of folks earning about $131,000. You've got 6% in the professional and technical services, $92,000. All right.
So here you've added King County onto the slide. So King County's in the red and Kitsap's in the blue, and shows you, okay, two different things you want to look at here. So you can see the height of the bars tell you how much percentage-wise of the job market. And obviously you can see some big differences here, right? Not to be totally unexpected, right? Population base is a little different, therefore mix of businesses is going to look different. Notice the government sector. Also true in almost any major metropolitan area, right? And that's just economies of scale when it comes to K-12 and other government services. But then you kind of see how it kind of weebles and wobbles across. But it's the salaries, though, that stack up.
Information and professional and technical services in Seattle account for 20% of the jobs. Information, average salary, information in Seattle, $325,000. Average salary in professional and technical services in Seattle, it's over $162,000.
Those bungalows just got a lot more affordable again in Seattle.
So if you think about, you can anticipate where we're going with some of this, and in terms of an outlook, more of the same. But if I'm in Seattle and I'm working at Amazon and my partner's working at Amazon, we're both making $300,000 a year, we can afford a pretty nice house in Seattle. But think of what we could afford here.
You know what's crazy about this? So Hart and I had the pleasure of talking to the New York Times this last weekend, and we were talking about Boeing. For some reason, they had questions. What we found in job postings from Boeing in Washington State is a phenomenal number of jobs they're posting are information tech sector jobs. Now you look at that salary information, and you think about why we have this large gathering of people in this sector within the Puget Sound region. They're drawn to it. There's a good job market there and a good place for companies to get recycled workers through that process.
So anyway, information, very good paying job here, phenomenal pay when you go across the water, and then $162,000 for professional technical services versus $92,000 here. So there's a dynamic that's set up. One of the places it plays out, at least some numbers showed up there. So plays out in your housing market, right? So you look at, and I'm sorry, the wage data comes from one source, housing data comes from a different one. So I'm using the most recent data possible, 2020, it did cut off a number, 2023 Q3, the best number we can get for average salary in Kitsap, $69,500. Most recent data on housing, median price, $546,000. So the 66.7, that affordability number, and by the way, you won't be quizzed on these numbers later, but if something comes up and you say, hey, what was that? We're happy to provide all of the data. You can, if you either contact us directly or through Joe and Teresa.
Displayed correctly.
The 66.7, lower means less affordable. An affordability index of 100 would mean the person earning the median income in that county could afford the basic mortgage on the median house.
And this is where we get in trouble with having affordable housing discussions, right? Because if we define housing affordability as median and average, then I have to say, but nobody makes an average wage and nobody buys a median home, right? And that's where the conversation goes off the rails. But I got good news for you. You're more affordable in King and Skagit County.
So we put Skagit up here. So you're not the only one that has people from Seattle earning money saying, wait, but I can give myself an effective raise by moving because I can get cheaper housing. And that's also gotten a lot easier because I now only have to commute in 2 days a week. So, right, that's the dynamic, and it's going to continue because it's a pretty strong dynamic.
Remember, the wages are where the wages are reported as being earned. So if I work in Seattle, those wages are reported as being earned in King County. They don't show up in your data, even though the person lives and plays here. So then that's what causes this disconnect in housing affordability sometimes.
Cost of living, how do you compare? So
we work with with the help of a lot of students, but we work with a group nationally, and 3 times a year go out, and everybody has the exact same shopping list to figure out how does the cost of living compare place to place. And it's not an inflation measure because it's every time the U.S. average is 100. So Bremerton, about 17% more expensive than overall. Everett, and that's the Bremerton MSA, so we're there. Everett, Kent, Seattle, MSA, but they actually break it down, and you can see Seattle about 44% above the national average. So still well below San Francisco and
For context, New York's over 200.
and a little bit less when you look at Kennewick. But just also back to that same dynamic. If I'm living in the Seattle metro area, cost of living looks quite attractive here. Right? Partly driven. This is all partly driven by housing. All right, James, you had some data on occupation. So one of the things that we're trying to show here is some of the faster growing, some of the occupations that have the highest projection for growth, right? So healthcare support workers, expectation is strong growth in the next 3 years. Same with computer and math. Did you have...
I always find this data kind of interesting. So there's 2 ways we can slice it. We can slice it by industry or we can slice it by occupation. And occupation to me is more interesting because people can move around, right? And it gives you a chance to think about that. But occupations with computer and math, I've noticed this in other areas as well, there is large demand for them. So this could be partly out of the infotech sector, right? That could be driving part of this. But that kind of information, 5% for 5-year growth is phenomenal. We are seeing a slowdown. 2024 is expected to have really low employment growth. It's going to feel really uncomfortable for some folks. And I'll just remind you that unemployment's also remarkably low. So it's not a problem. That's okay. It just means the job market's starting to slow back down. We're slowing the velocity, all those things that somebody with pointy hat would tell you is a good thing. It just doesn't feel good, right? And so all of your dashboard warning lights are going off because it doesn't feel good. And I'm going to sit here and tell you it's okay. All the numbers look relatively stable.
Except for the layoffs and some of the tech.
Well, except those people are finding jobs. I mean, that's the thing, right? Despite the layoffs, unemployment's actually really low. So yes, we're seeing people get recycled. That seems like a green thing to say. They're getting recycled. They're getting recycled into these new jobs. Now, maybe they're making less, right? But they also could be making lifestyle choices. I'm going to work less days. I'm going to work less hours. I'm going to work in a different kind of company, whatever. So again, we have to add context to some of the data to try and explain what we're actually seeing in the data. But good growth in Kitsap County. Good solid growth matches your population growth projections and those kinds of projections as well. So while the national data looks good, we think your localized data also looks similarly just as strong.
So one of the projects from the combination of U.S. Census and some of the other agencies is migration patterns. So we've highlighted Kitsap County, and if you can look, the darker the orange or the brown, the more people have moved from those areas to Kitsap. And then the blue, the darker the blue, right, the more people have left Kitsap County and gone there, so immigration, emigration.
So Whatcom and Thurston counties? Am I getting my counties right here?
Yes, the most common destinations for people leaving Kitsap.
Interesting. Western must be a strong pull. That's got to be it.
And people coming here, the big winner is Seattle, King County, and down towards LA.
So they're getting a lot of people from Seattle and LA here, huh? Dude.
You obviously have some snowbirds going down to the Arizona, Nevada area, but that's a...
Well, you know, in the LA thing, California gets a lot of grief for their outbound population growth. Folks, they're a large place. They got a lot of people. You could have a lot of people move out of California and not realize they left. So don't get lost in that talking point because it's more fantasy than real.
All right. And then commuting patterns. So another project that we wanted to sort of highlight from census and Bureau of Economic Analysis and IRS is trying to put together, all right, we know where you're paid and we know where you're reporting that you live, so let's figure out the commuting. You're supposed to take these numbers with a huge grain of salt because lots of people can have their wages reported earning by their employer differently. But what this is really saying is, all right, 21,000 people commute in to work here.
From somewhere.
41,000 commute out for work.
To somewhere.
And about 29,000 live and work.
How's traffic? No.
And part of what we're saying is these patterns are going to continue given the cost of living differences, given the income differences. When you look at different sectors, it's just too easy. So the sort of growth that you've been seeing and the patterns you've been seeing.
This is neither a good nor bad, by the way.
Yeah.
There is no ideal here. It really depends on your location and maximizing your own resources. Having people earn a high wage and bring it back to your community can actually have a lot of real positive effects. Right? You see more restaurants, you see more grocery stores, you see more banks. There's some banks in the audience, so I thought.
Are you
you'd throw
pandering
them a
to your
little bone.
audience, are you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you
All right.
see those kind of things because they suddenly have a lot more dollars in your community, and that spills out into more local jobs as well. So it's not a bad thing.
Right. We've jumped over a lot of data, and we know we're on a tight schedule, so we're going to be hanging out in the back, happy to talk about, answer questions. Hopefully
We're doing okay so far. No
Right.
hook yet.
But anyway, one of the takeaways on the macro side, a slowing economy. No way around it. Inflation has come down, but it's an interesting thing. If I tell somebody the inflation is now back down to, say, 2.5% for food, it's back to where it was pre-pandemic. It's still unfortunate because my groceries are considerably more expensive
That's
than they
not
were.
the same as saying your orange juice costs the same as it did 4 years ago. That ain't going to happen. Hard truth. Not
It's
going to
how
happen.
fast the price of your orange juice is going up.
Going up.
So pre-pandemic to now, groceries are a lot more expensive. Lots of things are a lot more expensive. And that puts a certain power and frustration around the economy. And we're going to say fragile. Now, a lot of things have to go right. They've been going right. They may continue to go right. But there's some real challenges for the economy and for the Federal Reserve to keep that story of a soft landing, meaning no recession, intact. We'll put 50-50 odds and on whether the soft landing can really happen. One of the things about that large segment of government employment, you're not as cyclical as a lot of areas. You don't get some of the rapid growth, but you also don't get some of the bigger crashes. I would say that's a good thing on the near horizon, to have that non-cyclical core, if you will. And then we're trying to set the stage, this note about possible additional stimulus. Projects on the base could help the local economy. We'll let others talk about that going forward. Joe, we're a few minutes over. So, all right. Then we'll play a game. Stump James.
Oh, no, let's not do that. while they're furiously taking those notes down, I'm going to grab this right here. While you're taking down our emails, go ahead and go to the next slide here. I want to invite you to follow us on social media. If you didn't get enough today, we post 6 to 8 things every day. We post a weekly summary every week. Follow us on social media. Once a quarter, we also do a podcast. If you really didn't get enough, you can listen to us. The next one we have coming out, it's in a month. Matthew Gardner's going to be joining us on our podcast this next time around. But we re-tackle all those things. And then we also produce the Puget Sound Economic Forecaster every quarter with monthly updates as well as a subscription product. And you can check that on our website. I think we have time for at least one.
We have time for at least one question. We could push it to 2 if we are efficient, and I love efficiency.
Joe, the first hand came over on your left.
Jennifer S. Tucker.
She's got
Trusted partner of KEDA, keynote speaker at our BIPOC Business Forum. Jennifer S., what do you got?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the thorough overview. My question is about underemployment. You talked about employment. You did not talk about the folks who are actually having 2 jobs to make ends meet. You did not talk about underemployment. So I'm very curious about how that plays into these numbers, or if you're doing any research on that number.
One of the hard things, the headline unemployment number is called the U6, because there is a U1, a U2, a U3. There are unemployment numbers that measure underemployment. I might be working what's called working part-time for economic reasons. I'd rather have a full-time job, but I can only get a part-time job. There are unemployment measures that get at that. There's not a lot of good data on I'm working 2 or 3 jobs to just make ends meet. But James kept saying, when we talk about aggregate metrics, it can be very misleading, especially for I'll just say people in different communities, and whether that's geographic or other slices. And our only nod today was the fact that food prices are a lot higher than they were 4 years ago. There are a lot of families struggling. We're doing a little bit of research on that, but let's talk offline because it's a great question, and I think the strongest reminder for everybody is when you read GDP or unemployment, let that be the start of the conversation, not the end. It doesn't mean everybody's experiencing an economy that's going up at 2-point-something%. It's often unique to a lot of people.